The boy Blackbeard, what's happening? I'm back. Salute. About to go into some more American history in this tape. You're going to definitely have to brace yourself for it. So what I want to do in this one is previously, sometime last summer, I dropped a 2-part series dealing with the American Civil War. And I talked a little bit about the history of the American Civil War, cleaned up some of the concepts and what we think about it. And today what I will do is extend that. So what we know of in the Civil War is the alleged history between pale Caucasian people in the North coming to free so-called black people from slavery in the South. That's what we have been told in school, but today we're going to get the truth. And in order for you to understand this, I'm going to have to give you the history from so-called Europa and the coast of Africa and basically the entire Asiatic continent, and then bring that into the Americas. So the first rule of the game is that if we are the Aboriginal indigenous people of the Americas, meaning the copper-colored people, then that means that everybody else that came to this soil is a foreigner, no matter if they look like us or not. So that means that even the other people of so-called melanin or dark skin tones that came from other continents, other parts of the world, as soon as those people came to the American soils, they were labeled as foreigner. So you got to remember that there's a difference between the indigenous or the autochthon and the foreigner. We are the autochthon, they are the foreigner. Now, I also want you to keep in mind that these people, we call it Moors, not the Amaru Maru, but this traditional classical group of people, we call it Moors. These people are foreigners. Keep that in mind. But anyway, there was a time in old Europa and on the coast of Africa, these people had their own towns, civilizations, and societies, just like we had over here. There may have been some trade and things going on over here in the super ancient world as far as providing the East and the Far East with food, technology, information, wisdom, etc. So basically, most of the empires that you all see in the rest of the world learned their stuff from over here. Now, they have showed us and told us this in reverse, because they got us thinking that Asia is older. So all the kingdoms and empires in China, they got us thinking that those are older. They got us thinking that all the kingdoms and empires in so-called Africa are older. But it's actually the reverse. Okay, the American empire is older than India, China, and Africa, and Europe. All right. So at some point in time, through people leaving this continent in the super ancient world, some people went across different globes and set up shop other places. But on this continent, you always had, of course, original people that were of color, but you had different stocks of original people. So as far as us indigenous American, us copper-colored, bronze-colored people over here in the West, you know, we are our own stock of indigenous people of the planet, more so residing in the West. But you also had other, you know, people of color that were indigenous to other places of the globe. All right. So what we're going to do is we're going to call us the indigenous people of the Americas. And then this other group of people that are of color, we'll say, that are on other continents, we're going to call them the traditional Moors. So anyway, so in the time of old Europa and Africa, these people had their own civilizations and colonies. And as I've said before, what we know of about the quote unquote Moorish Empire is that this was a very, very slave society, meaning that they depended on indentured servitude, slavery, feudalism, and all these different forms of systems to where basically you have people working for you, you know, and it's cheap labor. So we had two different people on the planet, you know, the indigenous people of the West, which were us. We didn't have so much of a whole cheap labor system where we had people working for us for free and stuff like that. You know, the land was very, very abundant, had an abundance of food over here and stuff. So, you know, people were a little more laid back and a little more relaxed. And there was also a lot of room. You know, we weren't all just closed in together like that over here. So we was chilling, you know what I'm saying? There wasn't no need to be enslaving people and stuff like that. But in different parts of the globe, you know, some other original people of the planet, that's what kind of society that they chose to get themselves involved in. And then this other stock of people that we're going to call so-called Moors, this also leads you into the history behind the whole Yakub thing, because we do know about the whole genetic tampering. We do know about the whole Neanderthal and the hominid man. And we do also know that there were a group of people who had to have been original people that mixed in with this Neanderthal class of people. And what I'm here to tell you is that the people that we call so-called African, or these, so-called African Moors, will say, this is who this stock of people is who chose to mix in with this Neanderthal class of people. Now, this is very, very important because in order for you to understand who the so-called Jews are, in order for you to understand who these amalgamated so-called Native Americans are, you're going to have to keep in mind that there are a stock of people on this planet who have chosen to basically amalgamate themselves and get rid of how they look personally. And that stock of people did not originate here in the West. All right. That was another stock of Aboriginal people. OK, so anyway, so let's kind of fast forward now into the times of the Spanish Inquisition, Southern Europa, and basically the colonial expansion of Spain and Portugal along the coast of Africa. We already know that when the Catholic Pale Christians, and when I say Catholic Pale Christians, I mean the people that we call phenotypically white, that, have blue eyes, red hair, etc. When they was, raised up enough, and a few of them had, married into some of these Moorish families and had gained a little bit of resource. Some of these families who were actually a mixed family, and then some of the original so-called Moorish stock of old Europa that we know of as the Boule here in America. These groups of people actually are responsible for a lot of the Moors in so-called Europe and Africa being thrown in slavery. So what I'm saying here is that the first concept you need to clean up in your mind is that pale Caucasian Christian people did not originate the whole slave society. The whole slave society was originated by these people we call in Moors that were across the Atlantic. And the pale Caucasian people learned about the slave society basically because they were the key slave of these Moors across the Atlantic. So, they grew up in that form of culture. So that's how they chose to start doing things when they obtained a little bit of resource. Also keep in your mind this, that during the time of the Moors being kicked out of Europe, like I said, you had some pale Christians that was, praying against them. And then you had even other Moors praying against them. So what I'm saying is that on the continents of so-called Europe and Africa, you had people of color or dark-skinned people basically selling out and enslaving other dark-skinned people. So the Catholic pale Christians that invaded into Southern Europe, they were helped by other dark-skinned people is what I'm saying. So when they expelled the Jews out of Southern Europe, the reason why is because these Jews were the amalgamated children of those Moors. Let me repeat. So when they expelled the Jews, the fake so-called pale Jew, when he was expelled out of Southern Europe, the reason why is because he is the amalgamated child of the Moor. So really keep in mind that Moors and Jews actually are the same people. The only thing is that the Jew is an amalgamated form of the Moor. All right. And even the Hebrew. So, for example, even the Hebrew is not even necessarily what we would really want to identify ourselves as. It is an ancient language that was spoken here on this land. But as far as these people, that's not necessarily who we want to identify ourselves as. Because the Hebrew would be the original Moor of Southern Europe who was practicing Judaism and that also amalgamated. So when you think about the Hebrew, the Muslim, just basically think about, in this tape in particular, think about these so-called Moors from Southern Europe. Some of them dealt with Judaism, some of them dealt with Islam. But nevertheless, they were amalgamating with a lot of the different pale people around there. So they had, mixed children. And some of these mixed children chose to practice Islam. That's who we know of as the Arabs today. Some of these mixed children chose to practice Judaism. And that's what we know of as the Jews today. So this now brings you into a situation where in Europe now, a lot of these Moors and Jews are being kicked out basically by other pale people and by other dark-skinned people. So now these, people start looking for other places to go. And one of these places that they came, of course, was the Americas. Now, when they came to the Americas, some of these dark-skinned Moors and some of these pale people that were with them, they had conflicts with us as the indigenous people here in the Americas because they wanted to try to invade on some of our land. And then the land that we sold them, they wanted to kind of move beyond that land. So we may have sold them some little land, for some little plantation rights and stuff. But they wanted to get a little too greedy and go a little deeper into our stuff. So when we talk about the American Civil War, what we really are talking about is the indigenous Aboriginal American, which is us, fighting against these Moors that were coming from Europe and Africa, and the pale people and the mixed people that were coming with these Moors. Because you gotta remember now, not all these people were bad. Some of them were coming here just to, to start a new life, and some of them were coming over here to be colonial. So now the ones that are coming over here to be the colonial ones, clearly they're gonna have some kind of money and resource. So these were the people that are being kicked out of North Africa and out of Europe that had money and resources. So whoever was tied to some families over there that had money and resource. And we know that that's both pale people, that's people that we call mixed, and that's going to be dark-skinned people. So when we talk about the original British, the original French, the original Spanish, the original Dutch, these are some dark-skinned people that came here to the Americas initially. So it wasn't a lot of pale people with them. It was them, and then it was some of the dark-skinned and pale servants and slaves that they had with them. And when we talk about these 13 colonies being set up along the coast, it was really a lot of these type of Europeans we was dealing with. So it was a lot of Europeans that were what we would call so-called black. A lot of light-skinned Europeans, basically. They were so-called black people, but they was light-skinned. People like Queen Charlotte and stuff like that. So what was going on is that when these European governments came here, these foreign governments, they had to deal with the indigenous government that was here, which is us. Now, the indigenous government, which was here, they were based on the geographic location and based on the confederacies that were existing at the time. Now, the word confederacy is very important because that's going to help you understand what this whole tape is about. But in other words, when they came here, for example, the Spanish came through the areas of like Florida and Georgia on the coast. So a lot of my ancestors encountered the Spaniards in the late 1400s and the 1500s. For example, as you all know, Blackbeard comes from the southeast of Georgia. And Blackbeard's great aunt told his mother that she was a Blackfoot Aborigine. But more than likely, a Blackfoot Aborigine is just a code word that probably a lot of ancestors was using. But really, when I dug into the research, because a lot of my people are from the coast of Georgia and Alabama on the west, okay, around Fort Benning, all right. But really, a lot of the Aboriginals around that area are from the stock known as the Oconee. They from the stock known as the Muskogee, and they from the stock known as the Savannah or the Yamasee. Because when the Spanish invaded along the East Coast, because when we talk about the Savannah Aboriginal or the so-called Savannah Indian, really that's the whole East Coast of the so-called United States. So I'm talking about from Florida, probably up and into like Virginia. And when we say Yamasee or Yamakra or Yamakayutah, those are basically just different dialects of the same language. So that would be almost like, you know what I'm saying, so-called black people, but they really are the same people, just speak different languages. Like, for example, I can remember a brother I met from Chicago one time. And when he came down here, he used to say the word Joe all the time. And that's just a word that they say, like, what's up, Joe? Or, they got their own little words that they say. Just like here in Atlanta, we got a word called jug. When we jug you or finesse you about your shit. So, we still Aboriginal people, so-called black people, but we have different dialects. So that's kind of how it was. So you may have spoke Yamasee or you may have spoke Oconee. It was another language called Hitchiti. It's called Hitchiti. And another language was Apalche. Okay. So that's ultimately who Blackbeard's ancestors are. And they kind of moved to Central Africa. To Central Georgia, excuse me. Let me reclean that shit. So when the Spanish invaded along the East Coast and coming up from Florida, a lot of Blackbeard's ancestors came from the east part of Southeast Georgia and came a little more into the central and western part, So my people are what we know of as Muskogee Aborigines, the Yamasee Aborigines, Oconee Aborigines, all right? The Chattahoochee Aborigines, that's Blackbeard people, and they still there to this day. Also, there are a lot of mounds, and there are a lot of like I said, there are a lot of mounds in West Georgia and the most eastern part of Alabama. Because even when I go all the way to my grandmother's house, I still can see them. But nevertheless, so when the Spanish and stuff involved and started invading, a lot of our ancestors was moving around. And, the Spanish and some of these was dark-skinned people. And these dark-skinned Europeans had pale, slaves that came with them, and they had dark-skinned slaves. So, like I said, when we talk about the American Civil War, don't think in your head, you know what I'm saying, either all black people fighting against all white people, you can't think of it like that. On the United States side, when it came as far as the English, because there is a difference between the British and the English. The ancient Britons were some Aboriginal people from Europe that we would also call so-called Moors, but their relationships were different based on the tribes. So, for example, you would have a confederacy in the southeast, and one of the primary confederacies was, of course, the Oconee Confederacy, the Muskogee Confederacy, the Yamasee Confederacy, the Savannah Confederacy. And basically you had these people throughout, the Carolinas, or basically the entire South, who were in different, let's say, divisions of what we would call tribes, or speaking different dialects, but they were all of the same nation. And they maybe even looked maybe a little bit different, but they were still all basically dark-skinned people that we would call black people that were in the South. So that's who the primary stock of all our people are. And those were the governments that were already here. So when the United States, well, prior to the United States, but when the Spaniards came, this is the government that they had to encounter. So when they came to the South, they had to encounter the Confederacy that was in the South. And when they went to like the Northeast, they would encounter the Confederacy that was up there. So in the Northeast, the Confederacy was known as the Iroquois. Okay, so that was what those brothers and sisters was doing up there, but they still were connected to us down here in the South. So, it was a lot of confederations, and these were our nations here. Now, we didn't have necessarily like a whole one empire nation, but it was a lot of confederacy. So we probably were on the road to create one major empire of the North American land. But by the time a lot of these invasions happened, we just had basically a lot of major confederacies. So that's what we would do. We would just basically have a lot of different so-called tribes come together, and we would create a whole confederacy. So a lot of people from so-called Georgia, that's why Georgia has a lot of counties. And the reason why Georgia has so many counties is because they had to split up our major confederacies, because we was mobbing that deep. A lot of these people in the South, they couldn't really defeat us like that. You know what I'm saying? So anyway, so now you have these foreigners coming here, setting up colonies and stuff like that. And they have these slaves coming with them. Now, some of these foreigners, you got to remember that some of them are dark-skinned people that own plantations, or so-called dirty Moors, we'll say, that are enslaving not only their own people, but enslaving pale people too, and got them working on the plantations. And this is throughout, the entire Southeast. Now, mind you, while this is going on, that has nothing to do with the indigenous people as far as us. We still live in our regular way, and they not really fucking with us like that. We having little wars and conflicts when they try to invade in our land, and when that government of the United States and these foreigners tries to expand. But as far as the way we live, we're not United States citizens. We're still under, like I said, the Yamasee Confederation or the Muskogee Confederation, or, you're still under your indigenous title, whoever you are. So at this time, a lot of these slaves, both of these Moor slaves and these pale Christian slaves, because remember, these Moors was enslaving their own people. They brought some of their own people over here in chains. They put and made them work on the plantation. So anyway, some of these people who were enslaved, they started to want to get away from that bullshit. So they started to run away from the plantations. And when they ran off of those plantations, they was trying to come and live with us, the Aboriginal people, the indigenous people of the land. So these people that was running off of plantations were from the Spanish. They was from the English. They was from the Dutch. You know what I'm saying? They was from the French. And some of them were dark skinned and some of them were pale people. So you had dark skinned Spanish and pale Spanish trying to get free. You had dark skinned French and pale French trying to get free. You had dark skinned dark skinned English and damn pale English trying to get free. So this is what was going on. So all these free people who are running off of these plantations are trying to run into the Aboriginal government, which is our stuff, which is primarily here in the South, in the areas of like the Carolinas, Georgia, Florida, basically the deep South. They trying to run to us now because they like, hey, we know we really are citizens of, France or wherever we just came from, but we not really trying to be part of their stuff no more because they just, enslaving us and ain't paying us no money. So what we did was, being the Aboriginal indigenous government and being the people of the Most High, once again, like I said, we were people living in abundance. We had gold, money, not money necessarily, but resources, food. We had a bunch of women. You know what I'm saying? We had everything. So, we weren't really a selfish type of people. So when we saw these slaves trying to get free, both pale slaves and these so-called dark-skinned or black slaves, we tried to help some of them out. And what we would do is we would kind of, teach them kind of how we lived. And then in some of the areas where we lived at, we would give them a little part of land. We say, okay, y'all just live over here. So these people that I'm talking about became known as Native Americans. So they weren't indigenous people, but they were people who basically had learned our culture of life. We taught them our form of government, and we didn't really mix in and marry in with a lot of these people, but we did mix in and marry in with some of them. So what I'm saying is that you had a lot of Europeans who were so-called black people that were being freed from basically indentured servitude and prisoner of war situations. And they came in and mixed in with Aboriginal American tribes. So some of our families are including dark-skinned European people. That's why when people do their family heritage, and it'll show that you have, let's say, an ancestor from Britain, or you'll have an ancestor from Germany or something like that. But when you look in the mirror, you look like a whole black person. So you like, how do I have an ancestor from Germany? That's because more than likely, you had a Moorish ancestor or black ancestor from Europe that came here, and then they intermarried with the Aboriginal side of your family. So majority of our bloodline is probably Aboriginal American, but probably because of these last few hundred years and a lot of these people coming over here from across the waters, some of these other dark-skinned people have married into our families. So that's why you will see a European link come up sometimes, or another link that's not basically in the Americas, because when some of these people were coming over here as free people, because that's another thing too, a lot of the dark-skinned people that was coming here that was from Europe, they had money, so they weren't slaves now. It may have been a small number of them. Most of the slaves was pale Caucasian people. And really most of the owners, were dark-skinned people. So some of the people that came over here, they already had their own money and resources and set up their own land. And they basically came in and started doing business with us and then married right on into the family. So you even had a lot of that going on. So the point is that, during this time, when they talk about runaway slave history, you know how they talk about with the slaves running away from the plantation and the slave master going to catch the slaves and all that. A lot of these were pale Caucasian people that they was going back to capture. But these pale Caucasian people was running into our governments or into our confederacies and trying to get included into our lifestyles. So when we did that, now all of a sudden you're starting to have a lot of different amalgamated Native American type people, because most of the people was they were males. Okay. In the same way that it is a lot more Aboriginal women here than it is men, it was like that then. So a lot of the amalgamation was more so between these foreign men and with the indigenous women, because there was more foreign men coming here, and there was a whole lot more indigenous women here. That's why prior to these Europeans showed up, the Aboriginal men here had more than one woman. So that's another thing. I don't know if you black women knew, but we used to have a system of polygamy, believe it or not, because it was it was a lot more of you all than it is us. So the brothers had more than one woman. So y'all say y'all want to go back to an Aboriginal way of life, but are y'all willing and ready to go back to that? And the only reason it was really like that is because to make sure that all the women had somebody that, to make sure they was being taken care of and to make sure that they was included in the family. So it wasn't like the men were being greedy. Some of them probably were, but it was just part of the culture. You know what I'm saying? If it's a lot more women, then in order to make sure the women get taken care of and to make sure that all the women, are included in some area of the society, then damn, some men just gonna have more than one woman, And I kind of see it going back to that. But anyway, so you had these people coming and they was joining our government. So then the foreigners, which is what we're going to eventually call the United States, that was made up of course, French, Spain, the English, and all these other foreign people. Eventually what they started doing is saying, hey, all our slaves that are running off our plantations, both Negro and pale Christian, because that's another thing. When they talk about Negroes, those are those Moors. So even the term Negro really don't have anything to do with us. Now, when they say black, or if they say Indian, that's referring to the Aboriginal American. But if they say Negro, that's more than likely referring to one of those Moors that was denationalized over in Spain or over in Europe. So even the word Negro don't have nothing to do with us. So African slavery don't have nothing to do with us. Negro slavery don't have nothing to do with us. But Indian slavery does. So if we want to know what the true history was, we have to look at Indian slavery, not African slavery, not Negro slavery, because that's not our identity. The Negroes are the denationalized Moors who were thrown in slavery by their own people who sold them out, and by the pale Christians who got ready to and capture some of them. But so the United States government in the late 1700s, what they did was they started to, and throughout the 1800s too, they started to say, look, all our servants are running off our plantations, and they trying to go into the deep South and hook up with these other Aboriginals in territories that we haven't really went into yet. Because at this time, the Spanish tried to come into the South, but we kind of fucked them up. You know what I'm saying? So, we didn't have too much issues. So a lot of the stuff in the South, they didn't really know about. It was still real hostile and still uncharted territories to them, especially like the inlands of Georgia, the inlands of the Carolinas, the inlands of Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida. Like, they didn't really know about a lot of that stuff because we still was running all that. So what they would do is all these new Native American mixed people, what the United States government did was they started kind of teaming up with those mixed Native American people. And then they started working out little deals and little side stuff with them. And after that happened, a lot of us in the South who helped out these amalgamated people, because they were slaves, and we, gave them a whole way of life. So what we did was said, oh, y'all want to team up with these pale foreign people and these boule ass nigger Mason niggas? What we said was, okay, well, we're going to kill all y'all. We're going to kill the dark skinned foreign ass Moors. We're going to kill the pale Caucasian Christians. And we're going to kill you Mongoloid, amalgamated mixed Native American people. So here in the South, we start killing up all of them and going to war with all of them. And that's what you all know of. It's all the wars in Georgia and all the wars in Alabama and all the wars in the Carolinas, in particular in the 1800s. And that is also what you all know of as the American Civil War. So the American Civil War was basically a war between the Aboriginal people who were on the North and the South. And they were fighting against any invading foreign government and military that had approached upon them. So, for example, some of the brothers and sisters in the Northeast, they were encountered by, like the English and the Dutch and stuff. Some of the brothers and sisters in Louisiana, like some of the Biloxi Aborigines, who basically are another group extended from the Yamasee and the Hitchiti people, because like I said, these are all just different dialects. But it was based on wherever we were, it was based on who we were encountering. Because like I said, here in the Southeast, around Savannah, what's known as Bullitt County in Statesboro, Georgia, Sylvania, Emmanuel County, Chatham County and stuff like that. A lot of us, we was fighting the Spanish, and then some of us migrated from the east into more of the settlement in the middle part of Georgia and even the west. So if you are from Atlanta, or if you was born in Atlanta, then more than likely your ancestors are coming from the Chattahoochee Aborigines, the Ocmulgee Aborigines, the Muskogee Aborigines, the Flint River Aborigines. Like, for example, I'm from in Riverdale on the south side, and right in the city of Riverdale, Flint River runs through Riverdale, and Flint River is a main creek or a main river. So that's another thing when y'all hear me talk about Blackbeard and the whole Blackbeard mythos. You got to remember, I'm a different form of Blackbeard. I'm not a Blackbeard that was on the oceans like you would think. I'm the Blackbeard that was more so in the creeks and in the rivers, more in the inlands. I was a Blackbeard on the coast of Georgia and on the coast of, Florida, and on the coast of Louisiana and Alabama. But we was dealing with more so creeks and rivers and stuff that was inland. So when we saw the Spanish and all these foreigners coming through these creeks with all our gold and food and stuff like that, brothers like me was going and cutting their heads off and taking that shit. But anyway, so going back to the Civil War. So what happened is that these pale Caucasian Christian people and these dark-skinned Boule Masonic Moors that decided to help them create the United States, they were fighting against us. And that's what the Civil War really is. So in the North, you had Aboriginals that were the Iroquois and the Aboriginals of Virginia. In those areas up there, they were fighting against invading Moors and invading pale people. Okay, and that's another thing too. Even this term Moor, it has a lot of meanings, such as a person's appearance, but it also means nationality as well. But it would be the nationality of Morocco or whoever these people were that came over here at this time period. So that wouldn't be our nationality. So when they refer to us as the Moor, they just referring to us as the Moor based on how we look. But there also are Moors that are based on nationality. And see, Blackbeard is not a Moor based on his nationality. Blackbeard is an indigenous American. Blackbeard is part of the American Aboriginal government, not the foreign Moorish government. You see? So maybe some of us here are Moors, and maybe some of our ancestors are, primarily from these people who came over here. But that's not Blackbeard. So I wouldn't be able to really identify myself as a Moor like that. I would say more I'm an indigenous American, who comes from the Confederations in the deep South, going back to the Yamasee and the Muskogee, and my ancestors, had basically in the more last few hundred years had civilizations and were living among the Chattahoochee and the different rivers around the western part of Georgia. So that's more what Blackbeard's identity is an Aboriginal American who comes from the nation states and the Confederacy of the South. So that's more of my identity than it would be a Moor, to keep it all the way 100 with you. So you do have certain Moors that may have a nationality, but they may not be dark-skinned people. That's why you see some of these pale Caucasian people wearing the Moorish fez. That's why you see some of these Jewish people tied in with the Moors, because they all go back to that lineage. That's why in the Daughters of the American Revolution, which is the pale Caucasian women, they all have a lineage back to the Moors because they were sleeping with these dark-skinned men and they had children. So as far as us being Aboriginal American, if they refer to you a Moor as based on your appearance, then okay. But if they refer to you a Moor based on your nationality and based on that you from Morocco or Southern Europe or Africa, that's not you. So going back to the Civil War. So to wrap this thing on up, this is what happened. Like I said, these Aboriginals were everywhere. They were in the South, they were in the Midwest, they were in the Northeast, but in particular in the South is where they had the most problems. A lot of them Moors in the Northeast, they was able to kind of slow them down a little bit, or a lot of Aboriginals rather. But once they started getting to like the South and stuff like that, they had some real problems with us. They never really was able to defeat us like that. Through a lot of intertribal warfare and a lot of other stuff is how we basically got slowed down here in the Carolinas and Alabama and Georgia and Florida. But that's ultimately what the Civil War was. It was the Aboriginals that were throughout the East Coast and throughout the South, no matter what state they was from, fighting against the pale and the dark-skinned foreigners that were coming here trying to set up colonies. So that means that the Iroquois in the North basically was still part of the Confederacy. So what we know of as the Union, that still is not the United States. That is the Union Confederacy of the Iroquois. So that's the Iroquois Union or the Iroquois Confederacy or the Virginian Aborigines. But if you look at these people, they look no different than the Savannah Aborigines. So what I'm saying is that the whole Civil War thing wasn't really like a North versus South thing like that. It was more a foreign versus indigenous thing. Because you had certain Moors that was fighting like the Buffalo Soldiers and stuff like that. Once again, these are Moors. These are foreign people helping the United States fight against us. And that's the real history of this shit. So to wrap this up, as far as what our real identity is, of course you are an Aboriginal American or indigenous American. and you come from whatever particular tribe, which probably is based on whatever major rivers or major creeks that are around where your people are from, and then whatever was the dominant nation or confederacy around in that area is the nation you come from. So like I said, as far as Blackbeard has his roots in the deep south, the southeast, the central east, and the western parts of Georgia. So Blackbeard is a indigenous American from the south, and he is a son of the Yamasee, you know what I'm saying, Muskogee Confederation. So that's the nation that I come from, believe it or not. And that would be more of my nationality. Now, if somebody were to call me a Moor, they just describing how I look. But if they want to know what nation I come from, then I would say, well, I come from the Muskogee Confederation, or I come from the Yamasee Confederation. Because you got to be careful with some of these Native American tribes because some of them are only mixed amalgamated tribes. And I'm even looking at some of these tribes that some of them are Moorish, meaning that some of these Native American tribes, they look like us, but they really are Moors, meaning that they foreign people. You see? So this may be confusing, but the point of the tape is this. That flag that you see the Confederate States in the South using, that's the indigenous flag of the Aboriginals in the South. That has nothing to do with the Ku Klux Klan. That has nothing to do with these pale Caucasian Christians. We was actually fighting to free they dumbass. And they don't even know it. So it's very funny how they turned around and took that same flag and was burning crosses and stuff in the yards of the same people whose ancestors fought to free they dumbass. So from now on, whenever you see a Ku Klux Klan or a Confederate flag, you really don't need to feel intimidated by that. Because your ancestors was waving that flag to free they dumbass. And when the Most High reveals that that's ultimately what it was, then they will have the shame and the guilt, and the true revelation will begin from that point on. So if you want to know what your true nationality is, once again, you got to look at what was the primary confederacy around at the time, or excuse me, in the region where you live at. Look at the major creeks and rivers around where you stay at or where you grew up at. Look at some of the Native American names of the counties and the creeks and rivers around where you grew up at. And look at some of the Native American tribes in that area. And that's the particular, tribe you come from. So we are the nation of, let's say, Americans or copper-colored people here prior to Europeans. But we may come from a particular confederacy or tribe, based on wherever we were in this, North American continent. And I'm going to wrap it up with one more thing. So right here we have in front of us, basically a little document I found from a human resource place. But what I want you to do is look at the definition of white, because we thinking white and black has to do with skin tone, but it has to not only do with skin tone, but also class and status. So under white, it has a person having origins in any of the let me repeat that. White, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. Let me repeat, white, a person having origins in any of the original peoples of Europe, the Middle East, or North Africa. So now you can understand why those Moors say that they're going to put white on their status, because they really are foreigners. And they have the white status of the foreign government, not the indigenous government. So a lot of this whole Moor science temple and these so-called Moors out here, y'all haven't been telling people the whole side of the story and the whole side of the truth of why y'all can put yourselves as white on here. Because to keep it all the way 100 with you, if I had to mark something off on here, of course it wouldn't be black or African American. It says a person having origins in any of the black racial groups of Africa. First of all, there's no such thing as black, and there's no such thing as Africa. I wouldn't consider myself a Pacific Islander. I'm not an Asian. Let's look at American Indian. It says a person having origins in any of the original peoples of North and South America who maintains cultural identifications through tribal affiliation or community attachment. Out of all these, I'd be more American Indian because I have origins of the original peoples of North and South America. Once again, I'm from the South of North America, And then I have a cultural identification through tribal affiliation or community attachment. Like I said, my great aunt told us we was Blackfoot Aborigine, and the Blackfoot are just a mixture of the Muskogee, the Hitchiti, the Yamasee, the Savannah, and basically the different Aboriginals in central and southern Georgia, in the coast of Alabama and Georgia. So that's actually more what my nationality would be. It wouldn't be white, it wouldn't be black, it'd be more American Indian. But I can't put necessarily Indian because that's a trick word, because I'm not an Indian. I'm an indigenous American. So it would have to be an Aboriginal American, Autochthonous American, indigenous American. It would have to be something like that. I don't mind American being in it, because I have a feeling that we created that word over here when it comes back to Amaru Maru. But I don't know about Indian. I definitely don't know about Black African American. And I definitely don't know about white, because I'm not from North Africa or Europe. So for these Moors out here saying that they white people and they putting that on North Africa, maybe they really are. But that means that you're a foreigner, buddy. You're not indigenous to America. So for the Moors that saying that they are indigenous to America, you need to learn a little bit more about the American Indian history, not this European, Southern Europe, the coast of Africa shit. That ain't got nothing to do with us. And it's confusing our people. So I keep doing this because I don't want you all to get confused. You know, there's a difference between the Amaru Maru or the indigenous American and the international foreigner